Before we begin, if you love powerful werewolf romance stories, subscribe and turn on notifications. This story gets intense. The wind howled like a living thing, clawing through the barren trees and sweeping across the endless white stretch of snow. Lyra Ashwin pulled her thin cloak tighter around her shoulders, though it did little to stop the cold from biting into her skin. Her boots were soaked through, her toes numb, but she forced herself to keep walking. Stopping meant freezing, and freezing meant death. As an Omega, she had learned early that mercy was a luxury she could not afford, not from the pack that cast her out, not from the world beyond their borders. Each step she took away from the territory was heavy with exhaustion and quiet grief. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, and her breath came out in shallow clouds. Still, she moved forward, driven by stubborn survival and the faint hope that somewhere beyond the storm she might find a place to exist without pain. She was halfway across the clearing when she heard it, a sound so faint she almost missed it, carried on the wind like a whisper. Lyra froze, her heart stuttering. At first she thought it was the wind playing tricks on her mind, but then it came again. A thin, broken cry. Her instinct screamed at her to keep going. Whatever made that sound was none of her concern, and stopping could cost her life. Yet her feet refused to move. She turned slowly, scanning the snow-covered ground, her eyes stinging from cold and fatigue. The cry came once more, sharper this time, unmistakably real. Lyra swallowed hard. Something was out there, alone in the storm. She followed the sound toward a cluster of half-buried rocks, her steps cautious. That was when she saw it. A small bundle lay nestled against the stone, almost completely hidden beneath drifting snow. For a terrifying moment she thought it was already too late. Then the bundle moved. Lyra rushed forward and dropped to her, knees brushing snow away with trembling hands. A baby, a newborn, wrapped in cloth, now stiff with ice. His tiny face pale and lips tinged blue. Panic surged through her. He was barely breathing. Without thinking, Lyra scooped him up and pressed him against her chest, shielding him from the wind with her body. "It's okay," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was comforting him or herself. "I've got you." The moment her bare skin touched his, heat exploded through her veins. Lyra gasped, her back arching as a sharp, searing sensation burned into her shoulder. It wasn't pain, not exactly, but it was intense enough to steal her breath. A strange symbol flared to life on her skin, glowing faintly before settling into a deep, warm ache. She stared down at the baby in shock. His breathing evened slightly, a soft warmth spreading from him into her chest, as though he were feeding her heat as much as she was giving him her own. Somewhere deep within her, something ancient stirred, answering a call she had never known existed. Miles away, in a fortress of stone and fire, King Cale Blackmore staggered mid-step. A burning sensation ripped across his chest, fierce and undeniable, dropping him to one knee. Guards rushed forward, but he waved them off, his jaw clenched as golden light pulsed briefly beneath his skin. The unmistakable mark of a mate, bond awakening. His eyes widened with disbelief and fury. It was impossible. The bond should not have ignited on its own. Yet the burn was real, alive, pulling his senses northward with relentless force. Cale rose slowly, dread and urgency colliding in his chest. Somewhere, in the snowbound wilderness, fate had shifted, and the world was about to change. Lyra stumbled through the storm, her arms locked tightly around the fragile weight pressed to her chest. Each breath burned her lungs, yet the strange warmth radiating from the baby kept her from succumbing to the cold. It made no sense. He should have been freezing, barely alive, yet with every step she took, his tiny body grew warmer, steadier, as though drawing strength from some unseen source. The ache on Lyra's shoulder pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat, a constant reminder of the marks seared into her skin. She dared not look at it again. Fear crawled beneath her exhaustion. whispering that whatever had claimed her was far beyond her understanding. Still, she adjusted her grip and pressed on. She could not abandon him, not after the way the world itself seemed to respond to his presence. By the time Lyra found the abandoned hunter's cabin, night had fully fallen. The structure was little more than rotting wood and a sagging roof, but to her, it was salvation. She kicked the door open and stumbled inside, quickly barricading it against the wind. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the baby's faint breaths. Lyra sank to the floor, her legs trembling violently now that she had stopped moving. She peeled away the frozen cloth around the child, using the edge of her cloak to dry his skin as gently as she could. His eyes fluttered open, an impossible, startling shade of molten gold. Lyra's breath caught. Those were not the eyes of an ordinary child. They watched her with eerie awareness, and for a brief moment she felt as though he recognized her. She tore strips from her cloak and wrapped him tighter, holding him close as she shifted into a seated position against the wall. Hunger, fear, and pain crashed into her all at once, but she ignored them. Her hand drifted unconsciously to her shoulder, fingers brushing the raised skin of the mark. The warmth surged in response, spreading through her chest and arms, easing her shaking. Lyra frowned. As an Omega, she had never possessed strength like this. Never warmth. Never power. Yet now, with the baby cradled against her heart, she felt anchored, as though something deep within her had finally locked into place. It terrified her almost, as much as it comforted her. Far to the north, King Cale Blackmore stood on the battlements, staring into the endless dark. The burning mark on his chest had not faded. If anything, it had grown stronger, tugging at his senses with undeniable urgency. He could feel her, faint but real, fear, exhaustion, fierce determination braided together. An Omega. The realization struck him like a blow. Fate had bound him to an Omega, the lowest rank, the one no one would ever choose as Luna. His jaw tightened, anger flaring, not at her, but at the forces that would dare place something so precious in danger. "Prepare my guards," he ordered coldly. "We ride before dawn." As Lyra drifted into an uneasy half-sleep, the baby stirred, his tiny fingers curling into the fabric of her cloak. A soft glow pulsed between them, barely visible, but enough to chase away the deepest cold. Outside, the storm began to ease, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Lyra did not know that armies would soon move because of her, or that a king had felt her fear across miles of frozen wilderness. All she knew was that the child in her arms was alive, and that whatever marked her that night would never let her return to the life she had lost. Lyra woke to the crackle of fire and the sharp ache of hunger twisting through her stomach. For a disoriented moment, she thought she had dreamed the night before. The storm, the baby, the burning mark. Then she felt the warmth against her chest. The child slept soundly in her arms, his tiny breath steady, his face no longer pale but faintly flushed with life. Relief washed over her so hard it made her dizzy. She shifted carefully, easing stiff muscles as she added another piece of wood to the small fire she must have built in her sleep. The realization unsettled her. She had no memory of lighting it, yet there it was, burning steadily, as if guided by instinct rather than conscious thought. Whatever bond had awakened within her was already changing her in ways she did not understand. The baby stirred as she adjusted her position, his golden eyes fluttering open. This time, he did not cry. Instead, he studied her face with quiet intensity, his small hand lifting weakly before resting against her skin. Lyra sucked in a sharp breath as warmth surged again, spreading from the point of contact through her entire body. It was stronger now, no longer a shock, but a steady, powerful current. She felt more awake, more present than she ever had in her life. Her senses sharpened, picking up the faint sounds of the forest beyond the cabin walls, the distant crack of ice shifting, the low hum of something ancient stirring beneath the land. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The baby only blinked, his fingers curling as though he were holding on to something invisible. As the morning light crept through the cracks in the wooden walls, Lyra took stock of their situation. She had no supplies, no food, and no plan beyond survival. The packlands were days behind her, and turning back was unthinkable. Whoever had abandoned this child would come looking for him, or worse, whoever wanted him dead would finish what they had started. The thought made her chest tighten. She rose slowly, keeping the baby bundled close, and tested the cabin door. The storm had passed, leaving the world eerily quiet beneath a blanket of fresh snow. She stepped outside cautiously, her breath catching at the sight of the untouched landscape. It was beautiful in a cruel, unforgiving way, and she knew it could kill them both if she made one wrong move. Miles away, King Cale Blackmore rode at the head of his guard, his massive black wolf pacing restlessly beneath him. The bond burned like a living thing, pulling him forward with ruthless insistence. Each mile sharpened the connection, fragments of sensation bleeding into his awareness. Cold hands, a racing heart, fierce protectiveness wrapped around fragile life. His expression darkened. Someone had hurt them. Someone had left a child to die in the snow. The king's fury simmered dangerously close to the surface. He signaled for his men to slow, lifting his head as the faintest trace of unfamiliar scent reached him. Omega, baby, and something else. Old magic, powerful enough to make the air vibrate beneath his paws. Back at the cabin, Lyra prepared to leave. She wrapped the baby securely against her chest and scanned the tree line, nerves prickling beneath her skin. A strange sense of direction tugged at her, subtle but persistent, urging her eastward. She frowned. As an Omega, she had never possessed navigational instincts like this. Yet the pull was undeniable, humming beneath her ribs like a second heartbeat. Trust it, something whispered inside her. With a final glance at the shelter that had saved them for the night, Lyra stepped into the snow and followed the invisible thread guiding her forward, unaware that it was leading her straight toward a king and a fate she could no longer outrun. The forest thickened as Lyra followed the pull guiding her steps, branches heavy with snow bowing overhead like silent sentinels. Each movement felt strangely purposeful, as though the land itself was shaping a path for her. She adjusted the baby's weight against her chest, murmuring softly when he stirred. He no longer cried from the cold. Instead, a gentle warmth surrounded them both, cocooning them against the biting air. Lyra's fear had not vanished, but it had sharpened into resolve. She had spent her life running, bending, surviving quietly in the shadows. Now, with a fragile life depending entirely on her, something fierce rose in her chest, an instinct far stronger than fear. Hours passed in a blur of white and dark bark. Her legs burned, yet exhaustion no longer threatened to drag her under. Each time she faltered, warmth surged through her again, steadying her breath and strengthening her limbs. Lyra became painfully aware that this was not normal. No Omega should possess this kind of endurance. She pressed her lips together, unease twisting in her gut. The mark on her shoulder pulsed faintly beneath her cloak, no longer painful but insistent, like a living brand reminding her she was no longer alone. She wondered who else felt it, and what would happen when they finally found her. King Kyle slowed his pace as the scent grew stronger. Snow crunched beneath powerful paws as his wolf lifted his head, ears twitching. There it was again, that unmistakable blend of Omega and newborn, threaded with something ancient and commanding. The closer he drew, the more vivid the bond became. Fear brushed his senses, followed by stubborn courage and an overwhelming need to protect. His chest tightened. Whoever she was, she had not abandoned the child. She was fighting the wilderness itself to keep him alive. Respect flickered through Kyle's anger, quickly followed by a dangerous edge of possessiveness. Fate had chosen her, whether the world approved or not. Lyra felt it then, a sudden pressure in the air, as if the forest itself had gone still. She stopped, her heart pounding. Every instinct screamed that she was no longer alone. The baby shifted, his fingers clutching at her cloak, and a stronger wave of warmth surged through her, spreading down her arms like armor. Lyra turned slowly, scanning the trees. She smelled wolves, many of them, and power rolled off the scent in suffocating waves. Her breath caught. Alphas. Instinctively, she took a step back, shielding the baby with her body, even as dread curled tight in her stomach. When Khal emerged from the tree line, the world seemed to tilt. He was taller than any wolf she had ever seen, his presence overwhelming even in human form. Their eyes met across the snow, and the bond flared violently between them, a rush of heat and awareness that left Lyra gasping. She staggered, but did not fall. Khal froze, shock rippling through him as the connection locked into place, solid and undeniable. Omega or not, this woman stood between him and the child without hesitation, defiant and trembling. And in that moment, Khal knew one thing with absolute certainty. Nothing would ever be the same again. If you're enjoying the story so far, hit like. It helps more than you think. The silence between them stretched, heavy and electric, broken only by the soft rustle of snow slipping from branches above. Lyra's pulse thundered in her ears as she stared at the man before her, every instinct screaming danger, while another, deeper force urged her to stand her ground. She had seen alphas before, heard their commands, felt their pressure, but this was different. His presence was absolute, like the weight of the sky pressing down on her shoulders. Still, she did not bow. The baby shifted against her chest, a faint whimper escaping him, and Lyra tightened her hold instinctively. "Don't come any closer," she said, her voice shaking despite her resolve. The words felt foolish the moment they left her mouth, yet she meant them with everything she had. Khal halted fully, lifting his hand slowly in a clear sign of restraint. The sight of her, thin, exhausted, yet unyielding, cut deeper than he expected. The bond roared between them, feeding him flashes of her fear, her determination, the cold she had fought through for hours with no thought of herself. His gaze dropped briefly to the child, and the world narrowed to a single truth. The baby was alive because of her. "I'm not here to take him from you," Khal said at last, his voice low and controlled. The words tasted strange, chosen carefully to avoid triggering her instincts. "You're both freezing. Let us help." His guards remained several paces behind him, tense but unmoving, aware that one wrong step could shatter the fragile moment. Lyra searched his face, looking for lies, cruelty, anything that would justify running. What she found instead unsettled her more. Raw concern, barely restrained fury directed not at her, but at whatever had forced her into the situation. The mark on her shoulder pulsed fiercely, reacting to his proximity, and she sucked in a sharp breath as warmth surged through her once more. She hated that her body responded to him, hated that the bond whispered trust when her mind screamed caution. "He was left to die," she said quietly, her voice breaking. "I won't let that happen again. Not to him." She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze. Not even for a king. Something in Khal's expression shifted. Respect, sharp and unmistakable, replaced the tension in his stance. He inclined his head slightly, a gesture no one had seen him offer in decades. "Then we are aligned," he replied, "because neither will I." He took a careful step back instead of forward, giving her space. The guards murmured in surprise, but Khal silenced them with a glance. "We will return to the fortress," he continued, addressing Lyra directly. "You will walk beside me, not behind. No chains, no force." His eyes softened almost imperceptibly. "I swear it by the bond burning between us." Lyra exhaled shakily, the fight draining from her limbs all at once. She did not fully trust him, not yet. But the bond thrummed in agreement, steady and warm, and the baby in her arms relaxed, his breathing deepening. Against every instinct shaped by years of rejection and fear, she nodded once. The decision felt monumental, like stepping off a cliff without knowing if she would land. As Kale turned to lead them through the forest, Lyra followed, clutching the child close. Behind them, the snow closed over their footprints, erasing the last traces of the life she had known, while ahead, a kingdom waited, unaware that its future had just walked into its path. The journey to the fortress was long and silent, broken only by the rhythmic crunch of boots and paws against the snow. Lyra walked beside King Kyle just as he promised, though every step felt unreal, as if she were moving through someone else's life. The guards kept a respectful distance, their eyes flicking toward her and the baby with open curiosity and poorly hidden shock. An Omega walking unbound at a king's side was unheard of. Lyra felt their stares like pricks against her skin, but she refused to shrink beneath them. She kept her chin lifted, her focus on the path ahead, even as fear churned in her stomach. The baby slept peacefully, warm against her chest, his tiny breath steady and sure. Kale was acutely aware of her presence beside him. The bond hummed constantly, feeding him impressions he could not fully block. Her exhaustion masked by stubborn will, the instinctive way she shielded the child, the echo of old wounds carved deep by neglect and rejection. It stirred something dangerous in him. He had ruled with strength and fear for years, believing order required distance. Yet this Omega, fragile in body but unbreakable in spirit, unsettled every certainty he held. When she stumbled once on uneven ground, Kale reached out without thinking, steadying her with a firm hand on her elbow. Heat flared instantly at the contact. Lyra stiffened, then slowly relaxed, and Kale forced himself to let go before the guards noticed more than they already had. As the towering stone walls of the fortress came into view, Lyra's heart began to race. She had never seen anything so massive, so imposing. The structure rose from the mountainside like a living thing, torches burning along its battlements, banners snapping sharply in the wind. Power radiated from it in waves that made her skin prickle. This was the heart of the kingdom, the place where Omegas like her existed only as servants, if at all. The gates creaked open at Call's approach, and silence fell over the courtyard as they entered. Conversations died mid-sentence, every gaze locked onto Lyra Wire and the baby in her arms. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wildfire. Kale felt it and reacted instantly. "Enough," he commanded, his voice carrying across the stone. "This woman is under my protection." The words were simple, but their impact was devastating. Gasps echoed. Lyra's breath caught. Protection from a king was not something Omegas received. It was something nobles fought wars over. The mark on her shoulder pulsed again, stronger than ever, and she swayed slightly, overwhelmed by the weight of what he had just declared. Kyle noticed and stepped closer, placing himself subtly between her and the crowd. As servants rushed forward and guards dispersed the gathering, Lyra realized with a jolt that there was no turning back. She had crossed into a world that would never see her as she once was. Somewhere deep within her, fear battled with a fragile spark of hope. She looked down at the baby, his golden eyes peeking open as if sensing the shift around them. "We're safe," she whispered, though she wasn't sure she believed it yet. High above them, unseen forces stirred, and the fortress itself seemed to hold its breath, because the Omega who walked through its gates was not what she appeared to be, and the kingdom was about to learn that truth the hard way. Lyra was given a chamber overlooking the inner courtyard, warm and richly furnished in a way that made her feel painfully out of place. Thick furs lined the bed, and a fire burned steadily in the hearth, yet she remained standing near the door, the baby cradled protectively in her arms. Servants hovered uncertainly, unsure whether to approach or keep their distance. She felt their curiosity, their judgment, pressing in from all sides. An Omega did not belong in rooms like this. Lyra knew that, and the knowledge sat heavy in her chest. Still, When the baby stirred and let out a soft sound, she moved instinctively toward the bed, settling carefully and adjusting the blankets to keep him warm. Moments later, Cal entered without ceremony, dismissing the servants with a sharp glance. The door closed behind him, sealing them into a silence that felt far more intimate than Lyra was prepared for. He studied her quietly, his gaze taking in the faint tremor in her hands, the dark circles beneath her eyes, the way she leaned slightly over the child as if bracing for someone to try to take him away. "You're safe here," he said at last, his voice lower than before. "No one will touch him without my command." Lyra nodded but said nothing. Words felt fragile, inadequate for the storm of emotions threatening to spill over. Cale moved closer, stopping at a respectful distance. "He is my blood," he continued, the admission heavy with consequence. Lyra's breath caught sharply. So it was true. The baby was royal. The pieces slid into place with frightening clarity. The power, the bond, the way the land itself had seemed to bend around him. Fear surged anew. "Then why was he abandoned?" she asked quietly, lifting her gaze to meet Kyle's. Pain flickered across his features, swift and raw. "Because someone wanted him dead," he answered, "and because they believed no one would risk their life to save an Omega's burden." The word struck deeper than Lyra expected. She looked down at the baby who slept peacefully, unaware of how close he had come to death. "I would do it again," she said, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. "Even knowing what he is?" Kyle inclined his head, something dangerously close to reverence in his expression. "That," he said softly, "is why the bond chose you." The mark on her shoulder flared gently, as if in agreement, sending warmth through her veins instead of pain. As night settled over the fortress, Lyra finally lay back against the pillows, exhaustion dragging her under. Kale lingered by the door longer than necessary, watching the Omega and his son sleep side by side. For the first time in years, uncertainty coiled in his chest, not of weakness, but of change. He had brought them into the heart of his power, and with them came truths that could shatter the kingdom if mishandled. One thing was already clear. Protecting them would mean confronting enemies both within and beyond his walls, and Cale Blackmore had never backed down from a fight. Lyra woke before dawn, the fortress still wrapped in uneasy silence. For a brief moment, panic flared, until she felt the steady warmth against her chest and heard the soft rhythm of the baby's breathing. Relief settled over her like a blanket. She shifted carefully, sitting up and scanning the room. The luxury still felt unreal, almost threatening, as if it could vanish the moment she relaxed. The mark on her shoulder pulsed faintly, responding to her waking thoughts. She pressed her fingers to it, grounding herself. Whatever this place was, whatever waited beyond the door, she would face it awake and ready. A knock sounded, quiet but firm. Lyra tensed, instinctively shielding the baby, but the door opened to reveal an older woman with silver-streaked hair and kind, observant eyes. "I'm Malus," the woman said softly, holding her hands where Lyra could see them. "I was asked to check on the child, and you." Lyra hesitated, then nodded. Malus approached slowly, her gaze flicking to the baby with clear relief. "He's stronger than he should be," she murmured, amazement threading her voice. "And so are you." Lyra said nothing, though the words settled heavily in her chest. Strong was not a word anyone had ever used for her before. Later that morning, Cale convened a private council. Lyra waited in the chamber as instructed, unease crawling beneath her skin. When the doors finally opened, raised voices spilled into the corridor. Anger, disbelief, fear. She caught fragments as Cale emerged, his expression carved from stone. "They will test you," he said, bluntly meeting her gaze. "They will question your place here. Let them." His eyes softened slightly. "I won't." Lyra swallowed, nodding once. She did not trust the council, but she trusted the bond that thrummed steadily between them. That trust was tested sooner than expected, As Kale escorted her through the inner hall, a noble woman stepped forward, her smile sharp and cold. "An Omega carrying the king's heir," she said smoothly. "How convenient." Lyra felt the familiar urge to shrink, but the baby stirred, warmth flooding her limbs. She straightened, meeting the woman's gaze without flinching. The noble woman faltered, just slightly, and Lyra realized with a start that the power she felt was no longer borrowed. It was hers. Kale's lips curved faintly, pride flashing through the bond. That night, alone once more, Lyra stood by the window, staring out at the moonlit courtyard. Fear still lingered, but it no longer ruled her. She looked down at the child, in her arms, and felt something settle into place, quiet and unbreakable. She was no longer just surviving. She was becoming. And somewhere deep within the fortress, ancient forces shifted, recognizing what the kingdom had yet to understand, that the Omega they questioned was already far more than they feared. The summons came at midday, delivered by a nervous attendant who would not meet Lyra's eyes. The council had decided. The words echoed ominously as Lyra adjusted the baby against her shoulder, her heart beating steadily despite the tension coiling in her chest. She felt the fortress before she heard it, the subtle shift in air, the low hum of power that seemed to gather around her as she walked the corridors. Servants paused in their tasks, heads bowing not out of command but uncertainty. Lyra noticed and kept moving. Fear would not help her now. Whatever awaited beyond the council doors, she would face it standing. The chamber was vast and cold, stone pillars rising like ancient sentinels. The council sat in a semicircle, their expressions ranging from thinly veiled hostility to wary curiosity. Kale stood at the center, unmoving, a silent anchor. Lyra took her place beside him without being told, the baby calm in her arms. Murmurs rippled through the room, and Omega had never stood here uninvited. "We are here," an elder began, voice sharp, "to determine the legitimacy of this bond and the danger it poses." Lyra's jaw tightened. Danger. As if she were the threat, not the forces that had left a child to die in the snow. Questions followed, relentless and probing. Where had she come from? Why had the bond awakened through the child? What right did she have to stand beside the king? Lyra answered each one simply, honestly. She spoke of the storm, the cry in the wind, the choice she had made without knowing the cost. She did not beg. She did not apologize. As she spoke, warmth spread through her chest, steadying her voice. The mark responded, glowing faintly beneath her skin, and the room grew tense. Power was not supposed to gather around an Omega like this. Then the baby stirred, his small hand lifting as if reaching for something unseen. A soft golden light pulsed outward, washing over the chamber. Gasps filled the air. The elders fell silent. Lyra felt it too, a surge of recognition, ancient and profound. The child was not just royal, he was a catalyst. The bond flared fully, and this time it did not burn. It settled. Kale inhaled sharply, eyes locked on Lyra with awe and fierce certainty. "The bond is true," he said, his voice carrying authority that brooked no argument, "and so is her place." The council could not deny what they had witnessed. Reluctant assent followed, edged with fear. Lyra felt the weight lift, though the path ahead remained treacherous. As they left the chamber, Kale's hand brushed hers, brief, grounding. "You did well," he murmured. For the first time, Lyra believed him. Outside, the sky had cleared, sunlight glinting off snow and stone alike. The kingdom had acknowledged her, but acceptance was only the beginning. Enemies would move now, desperate and afraid. Lyra looked down at the baby, his golden eyes bright, and felt a quiet resolve take root. Whatever came next, she would meet it head on. The night the bond fully claimed her, Lyra dreamed of fire and moonlight. She stood barefoot in snow that did not burn, cradling the child as silver light poured down from the sky. Voices whispered her name, not in command, but in recognition. When she woke, her heart was steady, her fear strangely distant. The baby slept soundly beside her, golden eyes hidden behind long lashes, his small chest rising and falling in calm rhythm. Lyra pressed a hand to her shoulder and felt the mark settle into something deeper than skin. It no longer throbbed or flared. It belonged. And so did she. The fortress awoke to tension. News of the council's decision had spread fast, and with it came unrest. Pacts loyal to old hierarchies bristled. Nobles whispered of prophecy and imbalance, and enemies beyond the borders sensed weakness they believed they could exploit. Kale stood before the war table, issuing orders with cold precision, yet his attention never fully left Lyra. She felt it through the bond, a steady presence, protective but not suffocating. When danger stirred at the edges of the kingdom, it was Lyra who felt it first, a subtle tightening in her chest that warned her before scouts returned with reports of movement in the north. When the attack came, it was swift and desperate. A rival alpha pack breached the outer defenses under cover of night, aiming not for conquest, but for the child. Lyra did not run. As alarms rang and chaos erupted, she stood in the inner hall with the baby in her arms, fear sharpening into clarity. Power surged through her, answering her resolve. The air shifted. Wolves halted mid-stride, instinct screaming at them to stop. Lyra lifted her head, her voice calm and carrying. Enough! The word echoed, layered with something ancient. The attackers faltered, then fell back, terror replacing aggression. Kale arrived moments later, fury blazing, then freezing when he saw the aftermath. The hall stood intact. The enemy retreated. Lyra stood unbroken. In that moment, the truth became undeniable. She was not an Omega elevated by chance. She was a force awakened by choice, mercy, and bond. Kale went to one knee before her, not in submission, but in acknowledgement. "My Luna," he said quietly. The title settled over her like a crown she had forged herself. At dawn, Lyra stood on the battlements with Kale and the child between them. The kingdom gathered below. The past no longer defined her. She had saved a life in the snow, and in doing so, had changed the fate of them all. The moon dipped low, the sun rose, and Lyra Ashwin faced the world not as what she had been, but as what she had become. If this story moved you, subscribe for more powerful werewolf romances like this. Comment below. Was Lyra destined, or did she choose her fate?